Welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the previous session. After listening to Future of Work, I'm wondering, what does it really take to bring about gender balance in the corporate world? And that's what we will explore in this session. We will learn about impactful, progressive, and unconventional best practices that can significantly contribute to gender equity at leadership towards building a new Equiverse, as we start saying from today. I'm also told there is a poll related to this. Friends, do check out what's the poll, make a guess, and we will be sharing the answers at the end of the session. So as we begin, restoring the balance, redefining the new matrix, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Archana Hingorani, who will be moderating this discussion. Archana is founder, Sienna Capital Management. With over 30 years of experience, she's a pioneer of the private equity industry in India. She's a great advocate of women's role in corporate workforce. And she's also an esteemed member of TalentNomics India's Advisory Council. Thank you, Archana, for your consistent support and guidance. Over to you, and let me remind our participants to put in their questions in the Q&A box. We'll get them to our panelists towards the end of the session. Over to you, Archana.
Thanks, Nikita. I think everybody here is quite accomplished, so pioneers all through. Let me quickly introduce Nadia Yunus. She is a very highly respected diversity, inclusion, and work-life leader with significant cross-country and geographical experience not only in DEI, the new word. I mean, till last year, nobody was talking DEI, but suddenly it's diversity, equity, inclusion is DEI. So pardon me if I use that again. Employee experience and well-being. She has worked across many countries. As she was reminding us, she has family all over the world. So has her work experience been all the way from Canada to Switzerland to UK and many parts of Asia. Namrata, a college colleague of mine who I'm interacting with after a bit, is the global leadership member for Egon Zehnder. Everybody knows who that organization is. She leads their diversity and inclusion practice here in India, has been focused on providing clients governance and leadership succession related advice. And she is also a fellow of the Institute of Coaching, McLean, which is a Harvard Medical School affiliate. Next, we have Swapan Johri, brave enough to come across with 3 women. I should not be saying that, I know, but you know, there are very few guys who show up for these events. So thank you, Swapan. He's an important member of HCL Technologies leadership team. Actually started his career with HCL. Today is a part of HCL Technologies, pioneering their e-security services in India. And he focuses a lot on new and challenging environments, which have helped him not only grow himself, but the business consistently across the APAC region. Last but not the least, Ashish is a senior partner at EY India. EY, as I know them, have always been leaders in DEI as well as trying to get a gender balance in their workforce. She works both on the DEI side as well as leads their agri and chemical industries practice. So she brings experience on both being a business leader as well as trying to move the DEI agenda within the organization. So warm welcome to all of you. And I understand that the audience is from more than 130 countries. So hopefully this conversation will be meaningful for all those who are attending. Let me quickly first begin with Nadia. And just because, Nadia, we just spoke about how you worked across many diverse industries, and some of them being physical asset type where, male contributions are more obvious, for example, the mining industry, etc. What, according to you, helps in really shifting the needle when you talk to many of these organizations in being able to get equity within the workforce? I'm purposely using the word equity today because I think equality has been much argued and discussed, and I think Namrata will talk to that point. But from your perspective, what is it that can move the needle, and how hard is it to help? Is it hard, or is it a choice that organization leaders, both male and female, can make in making sure that this is one of their agendas? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Archana. I think it's a really good question. And I can give you some examples from a very male-oriented industry, mining, when I was working in mining. But I think ultimately, a lot of organizations, they measure representation. They're not measuring anything other than representation. And in things that really matter to the business, you don't just measure how many products or services you offer. You measure the impact of those products and services and all of that. So why with people would we just measure the numbers we have rather than what those numbers mean to the organization? For example, in my experience across all industries, and I'll give some examples for mining, when you increase gender balance, and another gender, when people talk about gender, they're often only talking about women. And I think that is also a mindset that needs to shift. The reason why you joked about the saying of having one man on the call is that gender for decades has been set up as this is something we need to do for women, with women. And so I think one way is really to talk about gender equity and equality, looking at the experiences qualitative and quantitatively of men and women, and what happens when they come together and work together, and measuring that. So as an example, in mining, there's two examples that I recall and that I've shared as examples because they really stuck in my mind as how any industry could tackle this. So one is talent shortages are real and getting more real with the pandemic and with mass resignation and things like this. It's going to be an employees market soon, I believe, with employees thinking more about what they want out of work. And in mining, it's always been difficult to attract talent to remote locations and in an industry that's very male oriented. So one of the areas is security, mining security. And when I was working with a mine, there was locations in India and other places, Australia and Mongolia, other places. But in India, they ran a pilot and they tested out bringing in women security guards. And they actually recruited women who had gone through police training, but didn't end up being police women, right? They got all the training. And then they brought them in and hired them for the mines. And when they brought them in, they also brought their family members in to talk to them about the environment and how it would be safe for those women and it wouldn't. I mean, there were some concerns about how a woman taking a role like this would impact the family and the community. And so they worked with that. Ultimately, when they hired these women, a couple of things happened. One, the incidences of security breaches went way down. Men and women together were catching far more security breaches than the male team was before. And the women were very well trained. So they also raised the competency level of now the gender balanced team. Another thing that happened in this remote location is that women from all over the area were trying to find work in this company rather than the company trying to desperately find talent. Word got out that it was a good place to earn, to have. So I think there's lots of things. And the same thing happened on the ground with shift workers when they introduced part-time and women came into work part-time. The mine's productivity went up, the recruitment stuff went up, the safety incidences went down, and men and women working together made that happen. So I think piloting where gender balance makes a difference in the organization and really tackling where the business is challenged. Let women and men together solve those business challenges and measure what the impact is of bringing women in, and certainly paying attention to the environment you bring them into. So that they can come in and be successful. So I think leaders also need to share those stories. When you have those impact stories and you find them, it shouldn't be just DE&I or HR people that are talking. Far more successful when line leaders have those stories, share those stories with other line leaders. Far more influential, I think, than leaving that to be an HR program or process only and selling that as a way to increase your representation. Bringing women into the workforce and working with men is good for your business and and you should be able to say how it's good for your business. And more leaders, men and women leaders, should be telling those stories, not just in the support functions.
No, thank you for that. Yes, the support function piece is important, and we'll come back to that. Swapan, you're a business leader. So in your opinion, what should be the role of a business head to enable gender equity in an organization? Maybe some examples from your HCL experiences. Where do companies normally go wrong, and how we can course correct? A few thoughts on that, please, from you.
Sure. Thanks, Archana. I think first, promoting gender equity, equality, or getting to that level is been on cards for a very long time, right? As we all know, and at the pace at which it is going on, it will still take many, many years. And I guess the most important thing, therefore, for all of us to think about is how do you accelerate the pace? I think, every step that is to be taken has possibly been taken, right? And of course, there can be more new things you can do. You can innovate and get that done. I think at the business head levels in any organization, what is important is to think about this across all dimensions of DI, right? And when you work across all dimensions, you will work through immediate change that can happen. You can work through what is the long-term impact that you will have. So you need to view it a little more broadly than just looking at, I think as Nadia was saying, it's not just about representation. So, it's not like, I have a mandate to take my numbers up from 15% to 30%. I can have that, right? But that's just one small step towards getting this done, So if you look at, some dimensions there, inspiration, providing opportunity, encouragement, enablement, all these are the dimensions on which you have to work on. So as an organization, you would work on that. As a business leader, you would work across all of these dimensions over there. If I look at it from an HCL perspective, I'm sure most other organizations who have focus on DI would be doing this. So we have several programs, that cut across or work on each of these dimensions. So we have a program called Ascend, we have a program called Fem Inspiration, Prelude, Stepping Stones, for career advancements at different levels for women, different needs of women, depending on what stage of their career they are in. Fem Inspiration is all about inspiring them, right? So you have these programs run. There are focus groups of people who run those programs, right? And they do a marvelous job, the rigor and discipline with which they run that. But I think there's a pitfall there which all of us need to be conscious about, and which is where a business head or somebody that level needs to really, intervene and take note of and do something about it, is that, in all companies, many programs run at the same time, right? And therefore, this can also be one more program that is running over there, right? I think as a business head, and I think that's what we've done in HCL, most of us at the leadership levels and the next levels of operating leadership have taken these up as a program. Not just one, all of them as the priority programs, right? So you have to really demonstrate a bit of personal sponsorship to the program. So if you launch an Ascend program and send a mail out which invites women to come and join the program, and it's voluntary, right? Then the business leader or the concerned team head has to reach out to a few women and say, yeah, you don't need to do that. This makes sense for you, right? So you have to visibly demonstrate that sponsorship. It sounds a very soft thing, but it has a very, very important, impact on that. The second thing which I've seen, if you don't do that, I think, these programs become a tick in the box. And we've seen that too. There are units in which these programs are hugely successful. There are units where, they just pass off as just one more proposal from HR or from the DI team, right? Second thing which I think we come across often is, business pressures as such. Everybody is scrambling to meet their goals, right? It's so competitive. Everybody wants to get to something, achieve their numbers, and so on and so forth. In that process, you typically do not want, or you take whatever gets you the return the fastest, right? So you get to your result in the fastest possible manner. Use science examples, it will say, you take the path of least resistance, but I didn't want to say that because that undermines everybody's effort. It may not be the easiest route, but it's the fastest route, right? And I'll take an example. Take recruitment. So going back to the great resignation that's going on, right? So if you look at recruitment and you look at the number of resumes you get, and you just do a cut slice and say how many are, male resumes and how many are female resumes, you typically find the number of female resumes are less. Now, that's, I mean, you can just assume it, or you can just accept it that way. Or you take a look at the statistics and say, hey, actually, that doesn't tally well with what the global situation is. I mean, at least 25% at a minimum of women workforce, and I'm talking of our industry in IT, at least 25% of the workforce is women, right? If you look at globally, it's 39-40 or somewhere in that range, right? So how can it be 80-20 when you get resumes, right? It's just that male resumes come in more easily. They are more in the market, right? And therefore you get them. So you need to push the system. But when you push the system, you also need to give them some bit of time and space, right? It may be actually harder to get more female resumes, right? So you provide them that time and space, give a bit of patience, maybe relax the goal a bit and say, okay, we can wait, we can experiment a while. So being a little accommodative in your approach to achieving goals, so that you balance the tensions out over there, I think is another important thing. And I think the last thing which we've seen, I think it's very important, and not necessarily have an example to quote, but as a leader or as a business head, you have to get all stereotypes and bias out of your mind, right? And you need to demonstrate that you're in everything that you do, there is no real bias at play, right? And once you do that, then I think the next level and the next level will follow suit, right? Now that's easier said than done, because biases come in, they get built up over the years, could be social biases, could be this. It may even mean, as especially business people at those leadership levels may need to undergo some specific programs. And we've tried this, right? You put people into, as you call it, the bias neutralization program. And it can be any kinds of bias, right? But, you cover this bias specially, remove those and, just go out and work in a manner which is common and equal for all, right? But ultimately, I mean, every role is suitable for both men and women. There's nothing, right? I mean, if in India, we all know, I mean, combat aircraft is today being flown by women, right? If that can happen, why would some other role not go to women, right? So I mean, typically that's where the bias happens. You have a new role, a new assignment to give. You say, hey, listen, this would be better run by by John and not by Mary, right? But that's not right. I think that stereotype has to really go, and that starts with the business head. I think those are some things that really come into play. I'll stop here, Rachana, because I know you need to go to.
No. Thank you for that. Very interesting that you brought up, that you accommodative stance, as well as making sure that you have all dimensions of the aisle participating. I think it's very interesting lens from where your experience. Ashish. I wanted to come to ENY. I've been watching on the sidelines how they've been so focused on making DEI, gender equality, equity, etc., a very important mainstream goal for the organization. And since you sit on both sides of the aisle, trying to promote DEI as well as a business head, are there instances in your system where you've either been able to do out of the box ideas which have helped improve the goals that you've set for yourself, or are there instances where these two goals for a business leader, both the profit line as well as making all these things come together, do they clash at any point, or do you think we as an adult population should get over that idea of clashing and move on and say that this is important and we need to do it? Over to you, Ashish.
Thank you so much, Archana. That's a great question. Actually, at EY, we strongly believe that, having a diverse group of people bring about a lot of innovation, and clients come to us as a consultancy firm for best ideas, to solve their complex problems. And if you need to do that, you need to have a variety of thoughts, coming up with cutting edge solutions to them. And if you need to have those cutting edge solutions, you need to think out of the box. You need to think from a variety of perspectives. That's not going to come from a homogeneous set of people. So it's not a nice to have, but it's a business imperative that we need to have diverse groups, and we need to have that inclusive culture to be able to let those people thrive, to feel that they belong and be able to speak up their ideas and thoughts. So indeed, this is a very high priority. It's part of our vision 2020, Mission 2020 plus, part of our overall strategy at EY as a whole. And the beauty is this is therefore, percolating down as from the tone at the top. As I said, it's enshrined in our vision, it's enshrined in our strategy, and we have in every single global CEO webcast, our CEO Carmine DeCibio, who's a great proponent of D&I and now DEI, speaking about the importance of diversity and inclusion to drive that in everything we do. But talking about some of the out-of-box initiatives, yes, in fact, for that very purpose, even structurally, we formed what we call the Global Diversity and Inclusiveness Steering Committee with, and I'm happy to be a part of that, but we've actually across the world got several partners, across multiple dimensions of the business, spanning regions and functions, to come together and talk about it, and think about the way to bring about D&I in the way we do business day in, day out. We also have a lot of initiatives that we have across the board, like equitable sponsorship to ensure visibility, advancement of our people, and ensuring they get the right opportunities and assignments every day in, day out, so that they can learn and they can contribute to different engagements that we work on for our clients. We've developed some global sponsorship initiatives like the Board of Directors Toolkit and so on, which can be leveraged at the regional, service line, and account levels. Another very interesting thing that we've done is, even for leadership level, we talk about this concept called two in the pool. So when we talk about leadership slates and things like that, we ensure that you at least have 2 women or those considered as underrepresented in a market from a pool of qualified candidates, to get beyond this tokenism and, for there to be any statistical chance of them getting picked. And that's because I think there's been enough studies done by, research houses like Harvard Business and so on to say that if there's only 1 woman in your candidate pool, there's statistically no chance she'll be hired into that. So that's another very interesting aspect that we've got 2 in the pool. Another aspect that we keep talking about is what we refer to as PTR, that is asking whether it is a preference, a tradition, or a requirement. Because invariably, you see often people will choose to, go closer to people who look like them, who behave like them, who have similar likes, who talk in a similar way. And then that becomes more of a preference and more often a tradition. But is that necessarily a requirement? If the requirement is more to have diverse thoughts coming in, if the requirement is to have a different point of view being brought into that engagement, the way we think, we really need to challenge ourselves on our existing processes and the ways we operate to create better outcomes. And then you of course have, more tactical operating kind of initiatives and interventions that we bring in across the life cycle of the career journey, right from hiring, where we incentivize, our talent support, acquisition supporting agencies to give us more CVs of diverse talent, to actually, as we talked about, helping them across the life journey in terms of sponsorship, ensuring equitable opportunities. We also have a variety of other initiatives that we drive, including training programs to keep, ensuring that this is resonating across the audience. It's a reminder. So very much aligned to what Swapan mentioned, whether it is unconscious bias. We have a training that we have called Inclusive Leadership for All, which is a very interesting training. So we encourage everyone to take that regularly. We have our POSH trainings and so on. So, structural changes, structural, processes being put in place. Then you have these training programs, you have the ways of working, like we talked about, and then the tone at the top, which is so critical for, that whole behavioral shift to happen. So yes, lots of stuff happening on a real-time basis, and it's a journey. So there's always new innovations being brought in the organization to bring about this change.
Thank you, Ashish. So what I'm hearing is that it has to happen at many, many levels within the organization to move it forward. And I guess you guys are doing precisely that.
So both top down and bottoms up. So even from a bottoms up perspective, same way we have networks and things like that. So we can listen in and then bring those changes, up to the leadership and ensure that gets ingrained into the system.
Thank you. Namrata, you have a very unique position that not only are you a part of a large MNC, but since you've been dealing with so many different industries, sectors, you've done various studies, etc. Is there anything that you think from your experience that you've learned that allows us to think about how the work of future could look like based on all the things that we're talking about today? Any studies that you've done that allow us to see a little bit into the future?
Thank you, Archana. Yeah, there is a lot of work being done into what does the future of leadership look like. And if you recall, in the old days, the future of leadership, well, the leadership, not the future of leadership, was, and I'm now going to give you a slightly Western context, but it was this big white man in a dark suit, and that was the philosophy of what a leader would look like. There is much research done that I think 80% of US CEOs and of US presidents are all over 6'2" in height. And so that was the concept of what does a leader look like? Today's leader looks very different, and tomorrow's leader will look even more different. Today's leader looks marginally different. Tomorrow's leader will look very different, because we are building many more concepts of what leadership is. It used to be authoritative. Today it's consultative. It used to be very top-down. Today it's very much let's embrace everybody and take them along with us. The leaders of the future will look much more like the Satya Nadellas, very inclusive, very diverse. He would not have been successful 20 years ago or 30 years ago, but is incredibly successful today. So we are seeing definitely that leaders are looking very different. We've also been tracking leadership development, and leadership development in the old days. I've been with Econ Center for 21 years, and our focus is leadership development. In the old days, we would focus on competencies, which was, get things done, be strategic, get to know the marketplace, lead a team. Today, those are sort of table stakes. If you don't have them, you don't have the table, but you're not going to be successful because you can get things done. It's very much about how much are you willing to grow? How open are you to the nuances that I don't know everything? These are my insecurities. How can you help me? Leaders of today are talking about that, and leaders of tomorrow are much more humble, are much more open to talk about where their challenges lie and look to embrace good ideas from anyone. It could be the most junior person who joined yesterday. So leadership is changing, and what is a good leader is changing. Leaders today are much more inclusive, much more empathetic, and much more aware of the need to bring on diversity. That being said, I think the boards and those that look at companies and how they reward companies haven't yet moved. The pandemic has changed a bit, but until last year, companies were evaluated on financial performance. And if a leader is evaluated on financial performance, that's what they're going to do and focus on. I think over the last 12 months, ESG has become much more important, with a greater focus actually on environment than necessarily society. And I think that is the way of the future. And as the focus on ESG and society changes a lot more, then you will see a greater degree of equality on the table.
I think that's an exceptional point, Namrata, you make about ESG, because I've been telling everybody for the last 10 years that ESG is where accounting and laws were 100 years ago. Today, you can't think about not doing your accounts properly or following GAAP, etc. Right? Nobody would even dream of doing that. You have to think about ESG in that frame. That it's not hygiene. It's just a given. You have to get there, right? So thank you for reminding us about that. I'm going to quickly come back to Nadia. You and I had a conversation in which you said to me, there is a difference between the most famous buzzword in women, bringing women to the top is that they need to be mentored, right? So and you said to me, there's a difference. There's mentoring, and then there is sponsoring. Can you put a little bit of more conversation around that piece so that people appreciate what you were trying to communicate?
Yeah, and I think it was already mentioned, right? The need for sponsorship. Women, and there's been studies done on this around the world, women are over-mentored and under-sponsored. And, it's really a clear difference. A mentorship is like a coaching, and mentoring is good. Men and women both need mentoring, coaching on how to improve their performance, how to know the culture of the organization, all of that. But sponsorship is more, what do leaders in powerful positions say about me and my performance when I'm not in the room? How do they advocate for my development and my advancement? How do they, come to me and encourage me to put myself forward? Or even better, how do they put me forward for those stretch assignments, new opportunities, things like that? And sponsorship, some companies try to assign sponsors. Sponsorship is nuanced. You have to earn sponsorship. It's not, you can't give a senior leader the name of a woman and say, sponsor her. That person has to know what their background, the ability to get to know them. It doesn't have to take a super long time, but what do people say about you and your brand and your performance when you're not in the room? And when you hear the conversations, I mean, some of the past stereotypes of the network, the kind of men's network or good old boy network and things like that, that there was a natural sponsorship, the thing that kind of happens. And it has to be a bit focused for women because, women aren't necessarily a part of the natural networks and things that are happening in leadership levels that still are predominantly male. So how do you keep mentoring, but make sure that that ratio of mentoring to sponsorship, particularly for your up and coming and high performing women, includes as much sponsorship as for men? And that's simple. Ask leaders, who do you talk about? Who do you put forward? Who do you think about? Who do you network with? A lot of times male leaders will have organized meetings with women and women in the organization. But if they think about how many informal, unorganized meetings they have with males in their organizations or their networks, how can they begin to level that playing field and have more of those types of interactions so that they can more effectively sponsor women rather than having it all be contrived via programs?
Thank you. I'm going to jump to Namrata. We've been talking a lot about how there is a need for gender equity. There is a need for, business leaders stepping up to the plate and making sure that this is a part of how they grow, how they assimilate, how they include people. But I must, based on what I know, at least from over the years of what I have learned, it's not just about facilitating and making things available for people, right? It has to work from the other end also. So perhaps could you help us shed some light on what are the 2 or 3 things that you think women should also be doing differently towards moving this agenda that we're talking about, gender equity? Because it's not just a one-way street, right? You have to have people on the other side also step up and try and move towards that agenda. So some thoughts on that, please, Namrata.
Sure. So Archana, as you know, I've been doing executive search for 21 years, and we look for women leaders for several of our clients. And what we always find is that there is a shortage. It's a deep shortage of women at leadership level. There's also a deep shortage of women at the mid-level. But when you get to entry level, there are actually quite a good number of women, but they tend to drop off. Part of that is society, part of that is other reasons. And as I do a lot of coaching and leadership development, one of the things I've noticed, and I notice this even in myself, is that women tend to doubt themselves. Women tend to think that let's not grab that opportunity, but are we good enough? They hold back. They sort of fall back. They don't lean in. And I do feel that if women want equal careers and they want to be part of the Equiverse, that they also need to treat themselves like the Equiverse. If there is an opportunity and it's a step up, generally a man will step up. A woman will think about all the doubts that come into her mind and say, well, maybe I should do it next year. So I think it's important, if we want to take on those roles, that we also step up. We understand we have responsibilities at home. We understand we have responsibilities at work. But rather than worrying about it, is just to go all in and do it, make it happen, because it will happen. If you decide that's what you need to do, you do it. I talk about this as the sticky floor that holds women back. It's actually a big problem. There is a very, very sticky floor, and the only one who can allow ourselves to rise up above that is ourselves. So rather than worry about the glass ceiling, I think we should get rid of the sticky floor, and then we'll keep soaring.
Thank you. That's quite a nice way of explaining. I mean, visually, when you see that, you realize that it's easier to get up than to try and soar. So thank you for that. Ashish, we've seen that even in many women-led organizations, the pipeline for women up the ladder is still quite challenging. And I'm not saying that it's just because of a female is a leader, there's greater onus on her, but we still see that that ability to marshal better balance is still missing even from women leadership. So is that how does one look at that? Does one say that if women themselves find it difficult to make other women grow in their organization, it must be so much tougher for men or other people who are not women? How do you think about that as a thought process?
I wouldn't quite, put it down to a woman leader or a male leader. I think it goes far beyond that. It goes into cultural issues, and somewhat to what Namrata mentioned, or as an organization as a whole, right? So in fact, we have some great examples in India. If you look at ICICI Bank and many other such examples, you actually have women-led organizations where a lot of women leaders have come out of there, very successfully and led other banks. So there have been some fantastic women leaders who've been able to bring about that change as well, and also be the role model for other women. So it's not so much about that, to my mind, than it is about creating those enablers in an organization for women to succeed, and to encourage those younger women to to be able to live their dreams, give them those opportunities to really succeed, and also be having those sponsors in the rooms where they're not available, to speak up for them, to give them those chances and have their back. So to my mind, it's not necessarily about whether it's a male leader or a female leader. It's more about what are the enablers and what are the interventions an organization can put in place to make women thrive and to ensure that we're not having a leaky pipe at some stage.
Sure. Still, I mean, I know, I mean, ICIS is a great example, but if one was to take it to the next level, because for at least for the India audience, they all came from one leader who decided that he was going to nurture every possible male and female, and because of that, he had very good female leaders come out. But when you take it to wherever else they have gone, can we use that conviction and say because of that, there is more proliferation? I'm not so sure, only because I think it's not just about me wanting to do something. There has to be ability to bring that talent to the table, and that's the biggest issue. I think, I know I struggle with it every time I'm trying to hire, because every time I say I want to, I don't even use, 2 in a pool. I'm like, bring 5 of them and bring me, 2 or 3 male candidates and let me see if I can pick. And it's very, very hard. So I'm trying to get to that point. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Namrata will be equally, in the right position to answer that question from a hiring standpoint. But what we've seen over the years, right? I mean, and why do we say that even from a World Economic Forum perspective, it's going to take over 100+ years for women to achieve that gender parity? And that's more driven by cultural issues historically, where often women were the caretakers and men were the breadwinners. Right. So what happened is, even if a woman was very smart, talented, she achieved a lot. She got a great job. She worked, and then had this whole, especially in the Asian environment, the cultural barrier of once she gets married, having to take care of the families, take care of the children, and so on, and therefore, dropped off, given the amount of responsibilities on her young shoulders at some stage, and making those balances and choices. And the other issue that we often see is a woman who then takes that career break and wants to then get back into office. It's not that easy. Many companies hesitate to bring a person back into their organization at a certain level if they've taken a career break. That's why organizations like EY have set in place certain initiatives. We have, for example, an initiative called Back in Game. So which means that within a 5-year period, if you have left the organization and want to rejoin back EY as an alumni, you are welcome back at that same position as which you left, without any interview, in the same team that you left. So it gives the lady the comfort that she can work back in the same team and, at the position she left, not necessarily at a lower position. And then, of course, it does take time. Even we've seen women go on a maternity break for 6 months. It takes them time to come back, right? Again, we have an intervention there to help women who have gone on a maternity break. We're giving them transition coaches to help them come back quickly into the game and back into their roles to perform at the levels that they were doing exceptionally well before they left. So I think it's about, understanding what were those cultural barriers, why there have been these leaky pipes, and then addressing that at the very earliest. And as companies recognize the importance of having such talent, and therefore wanting to put in place such interventions, explaining that, because I think a lot has to do with communication as well in an organization, of why you're doing it. It comes to the word of equality versus equity. If you have the idea that you want to have a more gender balanced environment in your organization, it's not necessary just to have equality in the processes. You need to have equity, which means sometimes you'll have to make some different interventions to bring about that talent. And that's what we're doing when we have some of these interventions, that we encourage women to continue working. What's also important is seeing the societal changes. I think more and more now you are seeing women being the first time mothers who are also working. The children are seeing their mothers at work. It's going to slowly become a culturally ingrained thing that it's perfectly fine. Your mom doesn't have to be only at home looking after you. She could be a career woman. She could be a highly successful career woman, and dad could be looking after you. And that's where you have now paternity breaks, right? So a lot of these interventions coming in will help drive this change, more than necessarily looking for putting all the burden on those few women leaders in a few corporates to be the role models for everyone. I think more and more and we all know there are such few women leaders across the world, not just in countries in the Asian region, which anyway have inherent cultural barriers, but even around the world. So it's more important to ensure these changes are brought in structurally in the processes, so that these change, so that we can make an Equiverse.
Thank you. I was just trying to think in my head, summarize some of the things that we were talking about. And Swapan, one of the things that Nadia brought up, that it's going to be an employees market. We're already seeing that in the IT sector in India, right? You superimpose the fact that all male, female, everybody has understood the power of being able to work from home, have understood the power of being able to choose what they want to do, right? Because this 1.5 years has allowed you to do that. So you have this new employee out there, right, who is choosing, deciding what they want to do. You overlay that thought process of lack of good employees availability, the fact that they're becoming more choosy about what they want to do, and you then superlay that you want to get to this gender equity perspective. Are there any learnings from, especially I'm saying this to you because you're seeing a lot of change in the IT sector. How is it, are there examples which allow us to say that it's positively helping move this agenda along, especially because you have other issues that are now coming into play?
Oh, absolutely, Archana. I think we have, the pandemic essentially presents a fantastic opportunity, right? On the other side, the great resignation makes it an imperative, right? I think, you have to recalibrate and readjust a number of things from an opportunity perspective, as well as the pressure that is getting created. I think there is, we've seen this already. I think you can get more people, more women to be in this mode of working, which is the work from home. And I think in time, the WFH terminology will go. I think essentially it is a work in a flexible model, right? Whether it's home or office doesn't matter, right? It's basically being able to work in a more flexible model. So if we can reset and recalibrate some of those working models, right? You don't have to be having an office which is 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. It could be a 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then it could be a 11 a.m. to a 3 p.m. and then maybe another lot at 6 to 7, right? I think if you can redo some of those models, what would happen is that despite cultural barriers, social barriers that we all are aware of and we know of them, you will have more women who will start coming to take up work, right? It'll kind of induce them. And once more women are in there, and as it happens, you taste success, you taste achievement, you will see them aspire more. So it's like, a slow induction into doing this. So going back to our resumes issue and number of people available, it'll take some years, but if you start like this and you take this as an opportunity to make that happen, right? I think we should see a big difference coming in over here. So I actually don't see it as an issue. I really see it as an opportunity there if you bring all those three things together.
No, thank you. I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm sure the pandemic is going to help us move in the right direction. We have a lot of time to think and recalibrate. There's a question from the audience which is asking, what are the top 3 key enablers of implementing impactful diversity and inclusion programs, which may be being missed or not focused on by organizations? I think that's a mouthful, but basically trying to understand what are the enablers for actually implementing diversity.
I could make a comment.
Yes.
And I'll pick off the panel, because one of the things we've touched on is this qualitative and quantitative measurement. And I think it's super important to measure both throughout the entire talent life cycle. So not hiring, stretch assignments, development, opportunities, and seeing who's sitting in those ready now boxes for longer versus others, really looking at the entire talent life cycle throughout a career, and not only looking at what's happening in the movement, but also we've all touched on, what are the policies and practices you have in place that really promote equity, not just equality, at each where there's a barrier. And there are organizations out there, look, a lot of organizations don't have a lot of internal capability to do this, so they are partnering with vendors. And I do think, partnering with a vendor who can help you, and there are many out there. EY is one. I worked at an organization called EDGE, which stands for Economic Dividends for Gender Equality. And they really help accelerate the progress in companies that are willing to invest in this third-party evaluation of what's really happening from a policy practice, from a culture standpoint, and all of that. So I think really investing either internally or externally in measuring from hire to retire or hire to retain, and looking at the programs you need to put in place, and not accepting the mindset. We always talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion as a journey. And I'm a little tired of that, because yes, it's a journey. It's always a journey, but how come some journeys, some cultural change journeys in organizations are on the fast train, and the gender equity equality one, we're still on like a bamboo bicycle someplace. And this 100+ year World Economic Forum number keeps changing and going back, and the pandemic made it even go back further. I do not accept that this has to be a slow journey. And I think the minute leaders accept this has to be, it by nature is a slow journey, it will continue to be a slow journey. So I want to get off the bicycle and get on the fast train. And I really think the fast train is measuring, holding people accountable, transparency, and this new world where we need talent from, how can we leave 50% of the world's population out of the equation? It's ridiculous. So I would say measure, put your resources, people, time, and money where your words are, and really, put a stake in the ground on this.
No, thank you.
Ashna, if I can, sorry.
Yeah, no, please.
10 seconds. I think I would just add to what Nadia was saying, and it's a bit provocative, right? I think Ashish spoke about the top down and the bottom up. I think the way to accelerate this is actually to make it just pervasive. Why should this happen from a group of people, right? I quite envy Ashish's role. She does business as well as TI, right? Absolutely envy that. But I think the best is if everybody, when you spread a culture, it is everybody who has to take that. So there should be a way of making this pervasive. If you do that, the change will happen in 10 years and not 100 years.
I agree.
I have
So
another word to add. I think if we start a social media campaign that all women do not buy product from a company where they don't have equal representation in the true sense, that will drive change, because it's all about economics at the end.
yes, it is. It is. No, thank you for that. So on that note, Nikita is giving me looks, so I know we're out of time. Thank you all for your participation. I wish we had longer period, because this is such a topic that we can go on forever, but I hope we had more time. But thank you, everybody. Enjoyed talking to all of you. Over to you, Nikita.
Thank you so much, Archana, and I'm sorry, I wish too we had more time for this. But what an insightful session. Thank you to all our wonderful panelists, and thanks to you, Archana, for moderating this discussion so beautifully. I think, like me, all of you must also be thinking about how to incorporate some of these best practices in our own organizations and our own teams, what we just learned. But let me remind you to go check the poll results, because they'll be posted at the booths now. Also, I would like to thank once again Hilti and Aprava, our platinum partners, for this conference. Let's have a quick look at what their vision and mission is, and to know more about Hilti, Aprava, or our other partners, have a look at our booth. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great place to work.
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 We're turning energy into action. Action that ushers a new age of growth for India. Action that lights up a billion dreams. Action that uplifts our communities. Action that sparks a movement of sustainable change. Action that saves the planet. Who are we? Agni, Prithvi, Ambu, Vayu. We are Aprava Energy, a diversified energy business here to help India transition to clean energy.